I wanted to go over last Thursday's assignment, which was this trig day 2 assignment. So I'm just going to walk through each of these problems just to make sure that everything is going well with it. Because today we're going to just spend a second day on this material. So this is just me kind of going over it one more time. All right, for number 1, we have to find coterminal angle. So a coterminal angle is an angle that will end up in the same place as 130 degrees. So to get a coterminal angle, you can do it a couple different ways. You can add 360 degrees, or you can subtract 360 degrees. And you could technically keep adding or subtracting 360 degrees as many times as you want. That's just going around the circle. So adding 360 is going around the circle one more time, going counterclockwise. And subtracting 360 is going around the circle clockwise one more time. So you can do it as many times as you want. It's just going around and around and around the circle. So when we add 360 degrees, we're going to get 490. Or when we subtract 360 degrees, we're going to get negative 230. So looking at these options, 490 looks like that would be the correct option. All right, now this one is in radians. So now when you want to get a coterminal angle, you, instead of adding 360, you're going to add 2 pi, because 2 pi is the same thing as 360 degrees. It's just in radians. Or I can subtract 2 pi. Now, when you are adding or subtracting 2 pi, technically 2 pi is over 1. And what we're dealing with is fractions, and I can't add or subtract fractions unless I have a common denominator. So this fraction would need to get multiplied by 3 on top and bottom in order to get a common denominator. Same thing down here. So then what I have is 2 pi over 3 plus, and then this would be 6 pi on the top over 3 on the bottom. And I can add those together. 6 pi plus 2 pi would be 8 pi over 3. So that 8 pi over 3 is coterminal with 2 pi over 3. They would end up in the exact same spot. And this one, I would have 2 pi over 3 minus 6 pi over 3. And then I would get 2 pi minus 6 pi, which would be negative 4 pi over 3. And let's see if any of those answers are possible. Yep, negative 4 pi over 3. Looks like it. All right, then the next one, we're back to degrees. So I start with my negative 80, and I'm going to either add or subtract 360 degrees. When I add 360 degrees to negative 80, I get 280 degrees. When I subtract 360 degrees, I get negative 440 degrees. And 280 is an option, so we'll go with that one. All right, back to radians again. We're starting with negative 7 pi over 4. I'm going to either add 2 pi or subtract 2 pi. And again, those are over 1. And I need a common denominator if I'm going to add or subtract my fractions. So I need to multiply this fraction by 4, so I get that common denominator. So this will equal negative 7 pi over 4 plus, and then multiplying here, 4 times 2 pi is 8 pi. 8 pi over 4. When I add those together, I'm going to get pi over 4. 1 pi over 4, which is the same thing as pi over 4. And down here, negative 7 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4. And that will give me negative 15 pi over 4. So looking at our options here, it looks like pi over 4 is the one. That's the same thing as 1 pi over 4. All right, now we're on to trying to decide what quadrant something is in. So negative 2 pi over 3. If something is in radians, and especially if it's negative, you're probably going to want to fix that. So I can find a coterminal angle with this by adding 2 pi. And I'm choosing to add because I'm trying to get this negative into the positive zone. If I were to subtract 2 pi, I would just keep going negative. So I'm going to try to add 2 pi to see if I can get this angle to become positive. And again, I need a common denominator. So really this is negative 2 pi over 3 plus, this would be 6 pi over 3. And when I add those together, I get 4 pi over 3. Now, at this point, if you're still unsure what quadrant that would be in, that's totally fine. You might want to consider converting to degrees, if degrees make more sense. So if I want to convert to degrees, what I need to do is multiply by 180 over pi. So if I take this 4 pi over 3 and I multiply by 180 over pi, the pi's will cancel, and I'll do 4 times 180 divided by 3, and I will get 240 degrees. Now, if that makes more sense in degrees, then go for it. So our little picture that we kind of worked on last week was, here's 0 degrees, up here is 90 degrees, over here is 180 degrees, straight down is 270 degrees. So 240 degrees is going to be between 180 and 270. So 240 degrees is maybe going to be like about here. So this angle right here is 240 degrees, and it's asking what quadrant that's in. This is quadrant 1, this is quadrant 2, this is quadrant 3, and this is quadrant 4. So our angle is in quadrant 3. This one, number 6, is going to be a little bit nicer because it's already in degrees. And it's a negative, so if you don't like a negative, we can get a coterminal angle by adding 360 degrees to try to get it out of the negatives. And when you do that, you get 160. So this angle, 160, is coterminal with negative 200. And we're supposed to figure out what quadrant that's located in. So again, I'm going to get these kind of labeled here. All right, so 160 degrees is going to be between 90 and 180. So maybe like right about here. 20 degrees short of 180 degrees. So that's 160. And I just wanted to reiterate that negative 200 would be going this way. So the green is negative 200. So do you see how it's going halfway around? From here to here is halfway around a circle. That's 180 plus 20 degrees more. That puts you at 200. They're coterminal angles. Negative 200 and 160 are both going to end up in the exact same spot. But the question was asking what quadrant are they in. So they are in quadrant 2. Okay, the next one is talking about pi over 6. Okay, now you could convert this to degrees, but if you remember, let's see, I wonder if I have it here. No, I don't. I didn't have them all labeled. If you were to look back in your notes, when we had everything labeled in radians, right here was pi over 6, and then here was pi over 4, and then here was pi over 3. So this question is asking about pi over 6, which is right here, and that is in quadrant 1. Now, let's say you were like, I don't want to deal with radians, I much prefer degrees. Then just multiply by 180 over pi, and those pi's are going to cancel, and you're just going to have 180 divided by 6. And when you do that, you're going to get 30 degrees. So this right here is a 30-degree angle. That's in quadrant 1. All right, negative pi over 4. Well, I just want to show you, pi over 4 is right here. It's right smack dab in the middle of this quadrant. That's positive pi over 4, going counterclockwise. If I went clockwise the same amount, this direction, that would be negative pi over 4. Going the exact same amount, just going the other direction, clockwise. So negative pi over 4 would be here in the 4th quadrant. Remember, this is quadrant 1, this is quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. But let's say that you don't like it in radians and you don't like it as a negative. You can convert. So we could convert this into degrees, just like we did the other one. If I multiply by 180 over pi, those pi's would cancel, and I would have negative 180 over 4, and that would be negative 45 degrees. So instead of going positive 45 degrees, we'd be going negative 45 degrees. So that would be going clockwise. Or if you didn't like that and you wanted to make it a positive angle, you could add 360 degrees, and then you'd get 315 degrees. And if you look at our charts from before, 315 degrees was right here. However you want to look at it, these are all coterminal angles. The negative pi over 4, the negative 45, 315, they're all the same angle. It's just, radians versus degrees, and then a coterminal angle, which ends up in the exact same spot. In any case, the answer is the 4th quadrant. That's where this is located. All right, number 9 is asking what quadrant 230 degrees is in. So this is a nicer one again. So here's our general picture, right? 230 would be between 180 and 270. 230 is 50 degrees away from 270, so maybe somewhere around in here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you're just trying to figure out what quadrant you're in. So this is going to put us in the 3rd quadrant. All right, and then the last one, number 10, we got negative 5 pi over 3. So again, if you don't like it in radians and you want to change it into degrees, go for it. So you would multiply by 180 over pi. The pi's cancel. We'd have negative 5 times 180 over 3. And when you do that, you're going to get negative 300 degrees. Now, if you're still thinking, I don't like it as a negative angle, you could find a coterminal angle by adding 360 degrees. And when you do that, you're going to get 60 degrees. And then that might be easier for you to plot. 60 degrees is up here. So just so you see it again, 60 degrees is when you're going this direction. And then negative 300 degrees would be when you're going the other way around the circle. So do you see how we're going almost all the way around the circle except for these 60? So that's negative 300. They're the same, they end up in the same spot. They're coterminal. In any case, though, they're in quadrant 1, and that's ultimately what we were trying to figure out. Okay, so that is going over that form. Today is going to be kind of the same stuff. I think we just need another day of practice on it. So this is kind of like notes, again, going over that same material. So just as like a little recap, if you didn't write this down before, coterminal, the way to get coterminal angles is if you're in degrees, you're going to add or subtract 360 degrees. If you're in radians, you're going to add or subtract 2 pi. Make sure you get a common denominator so that you can add those fractions together. If you want to convert from radians into degrees, you're going to multiply by 180 over pi. If I wanted to go from degrees to radians, not very many people like doing that, but if you did want to go from degrees to radians, you would multiply by pi over 180. So these are helpful things to write down because they're very easy to mix up and get confused. And then the only other thing I can think of is in terms of a picture, quadrant 1 is here, quadrant 2 is here, here's quadrant 3, and there's quadrant 4. Yeah, all right, that should be it for today. Have a good one.